In this instalment, I'd like to clarify what I've been saying, just in case it's not quite coming across as it should. So I'm not saying that we are mistaken in the sense that we haven't quite got it right or not got it right at all in the way that we conceive of mental health, etc., etc. So I'm not saying we've got it wrong in some way, that there's a mistake, even though it sounds like that's what I'm saying. What I'm actually saying is the way we're seeing everything is a perfect inversion. Therefore, it's not a mistake. A mistake is where you're a bit off the mark or a lot off the mark. If you're talking about a photographic inversion or a reflection in a mirror, there's no mistake in that. It's just totally backwards. And being totally backwards isn't a mistake. It's wrong to call it a mistake. We could call it a mistake, but we'd miss the grandeur of the whole thing. If it is to be called a mistake, we should call it a cosmic mistake. A mistake that was always destined to be. A mistake that is inherent in the very nature of things, deeply inherent. But just because it's not a regular mistake doesn't mean that it puts us wrong. It doesn't put us wrong, because it does put us wrong. It puts us wrong in the biggest possible way it ever could put us wrong. But that too is part of the, whatever you might call it, the deep structure of things, that the way things work. It is required, because of the way things work, that we be put wrong as we possibly could be. Because that's just what's needed. That's how it works. Now, I can explain this a little bit in a bit of a clearer way, perhaps. Just by pointing out one or two things regarding the way we see mental health, and then showing how that is an inversion, an absolute inversion. So, for example, the first thing that we all agree about mental health, or psychological well-being, or whatever we want to call it, is that we want it, that this state of psychological well-being is something that we honestly want. And that isn't the case. And the second thing that we all agree on is that we can obtain it by perseverance, the right attitude, the appropriate skills, etc., etc., having the correct tools, having the correct theory or way of looking at things, etc., etc. We've got all of those ducks lined up, and there might be a lot of ducks. Hard work, perseverance, seeing things the right way, listening to, the experts, the correct authority, and so on and so forth. All of those ducks, when we line them up, then we can obtain mental health. And that's not true either. It's very, very far from being true. So just sticking with those 2 points just for now. To dispute those 2 very, very basic assumptions straight away puts us in a position where no one's going to listen to us, because we can't handle it if our basic assumptions are overturned like that. But that's okay. This isn't the type of a thing where we provide a bit of information and people hear it and think, oh yes, that's the missing information, I'm going to apply it. It's not really that at all. It's more like, if you already get it, then you'll understand it. And if you're the other orientated the other way, then not only will you not understand it, but you'll find it utterly, utterly ridiculous. And that is like what we read in the Tao Te Ching. And I can't remember exactly, but it's kind of like, if fools didn't laugh at it, it wouldn't be the Tao. If fools nodded and said, oh yes, that's very true, that's very good, then it wouldn't be the Tao. It's only because they laugh their heads off at it that we know it to be the true Tao. But anyway, that's going off at a bit of a tangent. Well, not really, but it's going off a little bit from what I want to say. So the first point is that we don't like mental health or psychological well-being deep down. Of course we say we do, but we don't. Any more than we like freedom or happiness. Now this angle is a bit more familiar, because if we've got any grounding in psychology, then we know that this has been pointed out, that human beings don't like freedom. And although we say we do, if we come to it, we don't at all. Because it's very, very frightening, more frightening than anything else. This is what the existential philosophers have said. Give us anything but freedom. Any type of old prison at all, but not freedom. So once we equate mental or psychological well-being with freedom and happiness, and happiness really just means, it doesn't mean that we're going around smiling because we're anticipating a good thing. It just means we're in our natural state. We're not afflicted. We're not in service to any demons. We're just allowed to be as we are, so we can call that happiness. It's just the natural state. And we can say that we don't like that, our natural state, because the way we are isn't natural. The way we are is we could always say it's a perversion of natural. It's a distortion. And so natural has now become our enemy, just as freedom has now become our enemy. And that's easy. It sounds a bit hard to digest, but it's easy to explain. The essence of mental health, if we wanted to try and put it in a very kind of simple bullet point form, is letting go. We're able to let go. If we're able to let go, then we're well. Letting go is wellness. So we could also say letting go is when we're not being gripped by fear, because fear is what stops us letting go. I don't let go because I'm terrified of what will happen if I do. But what might happen? Letting go is the risk. Existence is the risk. I can only exist in reality, not as an idea of myself, if I let go. Therefore, existence is a risk. And it's a risk that we're not prepared to take. It's the risk that the very first thing we come across in life is this risk, and we go off somewhere else. We say no, we head off down a different road, the non-risk road, the safety road. And so then we become a shadow of ourselves, a version of ourselves, a conditioned replica of ourselves. The self which exists in a world of zero risk. The self that is never exposed to existential risk. And the reason we're not exposed to existential risk is because we're not in the real world. Instead, we're in a world that is made by thought. So there's all the things in the world that is made by thought. There's this thing and that thing, and there's all sorts of things. It doesn't really matter how many things they are, because the key thing about all these things is that they're totally defined, they're known. So in existential terms, that's safe. There might be bad things, but we know them, so they're still safe. What we really don't like is something that we don't know and can't know, that we can't get a grip on, which is the world we see all around us. We don't know what it is. Nobody knows what it is. I don't have a clue what it is. And to be in that world or to live in that world has nothing to do with knowing it, because we can't know that world any more than we can know who we are. But that was never the point anyway, because knowing is a form of holding on. It's our defense against the risk of encountering reality, God forbid. So we create a zero risk environment, which is the known world, the conceptualized world, the mind created simulation of reality in which everything is known. Absolutely everything is known. And within this context, we create a kind of a life for ourselves. It's not a very natural life. It's an artificial version of life. But it's what we opt for, and in the absence of any awareness of anything else, or in the absence of the awareness of what we're missing, it seems to do just fine. But it isn't, because it never goes anywhere. It never goes beyond what we already know. So the whole of conditioned life, by the fact that it is conditioned life, exists always within the world that we have created for ourselves to live within. So we never go beyond what we have said things shall be or are. And that's where the safety comes in. So the most essential element of life, which is where we're letting go, it's the only element of life really, because life is nothing else, where we let go and we don't know what's happening next, and we don't know what's happening now either, but that's life. It's happening, we don't know what's happening. Something is on the point of happening, but we don't know what that is going to be. That's life. That's the risk. Straight away we can see we're looking at risk here in a different way. We're not looking at in terms of risk of the very bad thing happening that is going to happen if we don't control properly. Oh my God, there's a risk of thrombosis. There's a risk of nuclear war. It's not that type of risk. It's the risk when we step from the known into the utterly unknown, which is more challenging to us than trivial risks. A trivial risk would be a risk that we know what it is that we think is the risk. So no matter what else happens, we don't go beyond the world of the known. So the essential thing, that essential element of life where we're surrendering to something which is bigger than us and which is incomprehensible to us and will always be incomprehensible to us, is missing. So that essential ingredient, and it's not even the essential ingredient because there are no other ingredients, because that's the beginning of it and the end of it, that's the whole thing, is missing. So that's a big thing to be missing. That's a great thing, a great big thing to be missing. What's missing from the conditioned life is life. What's missing from the mind-created virtual reality is reality. So that's a big thing to be missing. And there's nothing more that can be said about that. That is our situation. Loath though we are to actually think about it or pay attention to it or talk about it or bring it to our awareness. Very loath. That's why we're loath to have a sensible conversation about psychological well-being, because we don't want to talk about what psychological or mental well-being really is. We absolutely don't want to talk about it. And the reason we don't want to talk about it, as I was saying, is because mental health is letting go. Mental health is when we're in that state of movement where we're moving from one unknown to the other unknown, from an unknown origin to an unknown destination, as Jung says. So we don't want to know about that, because our whole thing is holding on. Our whole thing is controlling. Absolutely, our whole thing is controlling. We want to make a life out of our controlling. And we do, after a fashion. But it's a very controlling life. It's a very controlled life. We are controlling, and we are controlled by our controlling. And if that doesn't sound very nice, that's because it isn't. It's a nightmare, basically, but we don't actually see that. So, if that is what mental health is, letting go, we don't want it because we are pointing the other way. Our noses are pointing the other way. We're looking the other way, and we're orientated the other way. And the other way is safety, risk avoidance, getting the outcomes that we want to have, getting the outcomes that we have specified that we want to have, which is the whole thing about being successful or being a winner. Being successful or being a winner means you identify an outcome that you really, really want, and then you go ahead and get it, and wow, that's the best thing in life. So we say, only that isn't life. It's the inversion. It's the inversion of life, the antithesis of life. It is life turned on its head. It's fear of life that validates itself somehow as a legitimate way of living life. And the only way the fear of life can legitimize itself as a valid way of living life is if the real thing is completely never mentioned, completely removed from the picture. And that is exactly what we do. So if our stunted way of living life has to be validated and seem at least a bit reasonable to us, and not like a total caricature, not like a hideous rigmarole that we have to keep on enacting because we are too afraid not to, and that's the reality of it, that's the truth of it, then we have to banish reality. And that's what we've done. So any talk about us being interested in mental health is sheer nonsense. Absolute sheer nonsense. And that's the first point to understand. And if we can understand that, well, that's pretty good. That's really something. And you won't hear any mental health professional say this. Well, I can't really swear to that. I wouldn't bet too much money on it. You might hear one or two people saying it, possibly. Probably not mental health professionals, but you might do. But they'll usually tell you something else. Because what we are talking about when we're socially adapted, when we're seeing things the same way everyone else sees things, which is the correct way to see things, because if you don't see things like that, you're disqualified straight away. So when we are seeing things the same way everyone else sees things, then we have a different version of mental health. Our version of mental health becomes to live in a controlled, totally regulated way and yet be happy. To be totally controlled by our own controlling and yet to be fulfilled. To be slaves and to be slaves who are saying, yes, this is it. This is me living my best life. That's what we mean. Because we want to carry on living the conditioned life, which is the life which is afraid of existential risk, and yet feel like we're really doing it. We're really out there and we're really doing it. We're doing it. No holding back. So that's a pretty weird concept of mental health we got there, but it's our concept. So we strain towards that and we strive towards that, and we really do want it on that level. We really do want it, even if it's an absurd thing to want, because it's a total paradox or a total self-contradiction. So then the second point is that we can obtain well-being on purpose by dint of applying the correct methods, having the right attitude, being not afraid to keep trying, and keeping abreast of all that research. And never has a word been abused so much as the word research has been abused within the domain of mental health. Boy, has that word been abused. But I won't go into that right now. But what I will say is that this idea that we can obtain mental health isn't on purposefully because we want to, because we're doing the right things, because we are compliant with the consensus way of seeing things, because we have adapted to the consensus way of seeing things, and we're doing what we're supposed to do, conforming to the therapist, conforming to the psychiatrist, conforming to whatever, is utter nonsense. Even if it wasn't the fact that we're conforming to society's views of what mental health is, even if there was no society and I was trying to be more mentally healthy, I can't do it. Even if I was the only person in the world, it's utterly impossible to do. Fundamentally impossible. It's one of the great fundamental impossibilities. It's like a law of physics. It's of that order of things. And the reason that it is so impossible is because everything that we want as conditioned beings, as who we falsely understand ourselves to be because we're thinking about it instead of actually feeling it, is what we really want. What I'm kind of getting lost, but what we really want as conditioned beings is to carry on living in delusion. We want to carry on not seeing the truth. And so whatever we do want, we only want it because it is reaffirming the false basis that we're starting off from. So in actual fact, everything I do want is just my own projection of something that suits me. I want it because it confirms my underlying bias. The only reason I want it is because it agrees with my assumptions. And so anything I want, anything I try to obtain is by definition a projection is my own projection. It's a projection of the mind. I couldn't possibly work towards something that I cannot comprehend and that I am in total denial of. So there is no way that the conditioned self or ego can ever motor its way along to mental health. One, because it doesn't want mental health. Two, because it is incapable of knowing what mental health is, and as long as it is there, striving to obtain it, the conditioned self, striving to better itself, improve itself, is itself what is stopping us from being mentally healthy. There's no deliberate way to obtain, I'm going around in circles here, but the only way to deliberately obtain mental health would be if mental health was something that we could control, have as an outcome that we have designated a good outcome, and that we can control successfully to make it happen. That's what we do, that we live in a world of control, and control is all about getting what we want to happen, and what we don't want to happen to make damn sure it doesn't happen. But mental health is not something that can be obtained by the conditioned self or ego, because this viewpoint of a conditioned self go is a false, it's a false viewpoint. Everything we see from that false viewpoint, everything we want and everything we fear, is equally false. As the conditioned self, I have absolutely no way of relating to reality, to the state of freedom or to the state of letting go. Absolutely no way. So how can I possibly bring it about? Okay, thanks for watching.